Hey, hello everyone. I am here today with Marissa Payne and super excited to have this conversation because I've been very intrigued about the different certification programs that exist for dementia caregivers. And I'm just really excited to talk about this. We had Jennifer Stelter. Am I saying that right, Marissa? I realized I said her name.
Jennifer Stelter. Yep.
Jennifer Stelter on a previous episode. And she was fantastic. And she really got me interested in this evidence-based program that she developed. So I invited Marissa Payne on to talk about this program. Marissa is a credentialed brain and cognitive health coach, and she's a Dementia Connection Specialist certified trainer. And she's also a dementia care consultant, and she has over a decade of experience. And so, Marissa, I just want to thank you so much for coming on and having this conversation with us. And we can deep dive into all things dementia, and most specifically this training that, so again, I'm very excited about it for a lot of reasons. One is that it's evidence-based. Another reason is that it's so applicable. It's you and I had a brief discussion beforehand talking about how many programs take the heart and the soul out of the reason that it's developed to begin with, to help people receive better care and to help the care providers be more supported and to give tools. And this program seems to really embody and embrace that model. So do you mind jumping in? And I read a little brief discussion or description about you. Do you mind sharing with us just a little about your history of working with folks who have dementia and their caregivers?
Of course. Yeah. Thank you for inviting me on. I'm happy to share. So, gosh, where do I start? Well, I started when I was 2 years old, actually. My parents owned a board and care home that they ran out of our own family home. So there wasn't a separate residential building. It was very much, we had 6 residents living in one wing, and then my brothers and I sharing a bedroom down the other side, and all of us sharing the same dining room table and fighting over the remote so that we don't have to watch MASH again, and playing rummy in the evenings after dinner, and really sharing in the lived experiences of my elders. And I grew up that way for 13 years. They ran the business in our home. So, I had a really interesting start and unique introduction and insight into the aging process and into dementia. Alzheimer's being the most common form, but there's many forms of dementia, and I came across many of them in my lifetime so far. But that was my parents, and as true to most kids, I grew up and I didn't want to do what my parents did. I
Yeah.
wanted to do something completely different, right? So I went off. I lived abroad for about 7 years. I lived over in England, and I worked in financial services. And then, there was the financial bust and all that. And then I worked for a nuclear power company, and I actually got to stand on a nuclear reactor of
Wow.
all things. And during all of that, my grandpa was living with Alzheimer's, and my grandpa and I were very, very close. And in 2015, the disease progression, he had progressed to a point where the decline was more rapid than it had been previously. And I decided it was time for me to come home. And in that process of uprooting and returning to my roots, so to speak, I was in a fortunate position where I could do anything I wanted. And so I took time to reflect and decided it was time to do what my parents did. And so I started in life enrichment and activities, and I really found a passion for engagement and prescriptive engagement. And I found out I'm a bit of a brain geek. And so I dived into that. And, at some point, most recently, I was the product manager for an assisted living company. I manage their wellness focused lifestyle products, so their activity programming, lifestyle programming for their assisted living communities. There were 42 communities in 7 Western states, and that was during the pandemic. Since then, I've gone independent to try to help people before they ever are in a community-based living situation, because people need these tools and this information years before then, and family members need what I know, and I just felt like I could help people. So I am now a consultant, and I help with prescriptive engagement. I've partnered with Dr. Stelter at the Dementia Connection Institute so that I can offer this nationally accredited education for both family and professional caregivers, and just continue on my parents' legacy, so to speak, in the memory of my grandpa.
Wow. Oh my gosh. I love starting with this question because, we can jump right into the meat of the issue. But really what speaks, I think, to so many people is your heart. What drives you in this work, and where do you find that passion? And I just love meeting people that are in this field. And you and I have kind of similar backgrounds in that my parents didn't own a board and care home, but my mom was a nurse, and I grew up in a nursing home environment. And boy, the impact of that as a child is, they talk about exposing young children to learning different languages at a young age, and how you're able to integrate that. And I feel similarly about growing up in an environment with older adults and with folks who have cognitive or memory impairment. I think that it shapes us in ways that we others may not realize. So
It does. And I'm so grateful, and I'm sure you feel the same way. I'm so grateful for such a unique upbringing, because, on that same sort of metaphor, we kind of speak a different language, and we're able to teach that language to others who find themselves in caregiving roles. So it all sort of lined up so that we're meeting the needs that we were supposed to meet.
Love it. Oh. And for those, I just have to say, I peeked at your website. You have a great photo of you, and it must be one of your brothers standing
Oh, yeah.
of the home. Oh, I love it. Yeah, it just kind of brings it all into
The beat up Polaroid. You can see the tape marks and the thumbtack holes.
Yep. I love that you have that on there. So let's jump in a little bit. I'm really curious. How did you and Dr. I'm going to say her name wrong because I started saying it Stetler, but it's Stelter. Okay.
Yes.
How did you and Dr. Stelter meet? Give us a little bit of a background before we jump in. I really want to dive into this model as well.
It's so interesting to look back on how we make these connections, because you just don't expect them to lead where they lead half the time. I met Dr. Stelter through Charles DeVille-Morin, who is the CEO of Linked Senior, which is a resident engagement technology platform that the senior living community or company that I was the product manager for used in their product and programming. And so in a roundabout way, we were able to form this relationship on both as them providing a service to our company and the product that I was managing and part of our programming, but also our shared passion for prescriptive engagement and the profound impact it can have on the quality of life of the residents in community-based living. And so when I left that company, Dr. Stelter had also just launched her Dementia Connection Specialist seminar and Dementia Connection Specialist certified trainer. And I reached out to her and partnered with her to become one of her trainers so that I'm able to disseminate that model of care and communication to other caregivers.
Fantastic. I love how this
I had to connect the dots in my head. I could see them.
Well, I'll share a little side note before we jump in, but I was at a health fair. I'm in Olympia, Washington. I was at a health fair, and I was meeting, I honestly can't remember who it was I was talking to. It was I don't remember, it was somebody with hospice, or It was an organization, a healthcare organization, and we were talking, of course, about dementia and our passion for that. And she mentioned your name. She's like, "You have to meet
Yeah.
Marissa." Yes, and I was like, "Wait, I know Marissa. I know who you're talking about. This is crazy."
Oh, how
So
funny.
I'll find out. I'll go back into my mind and find out who that was. But it was again one of those really neat synchronicities of,
Mhm.
okay, yeah, that's the people that we need to know are coming into our lives for a reason. And so you're one of them, Marissa.
Oh, well, likewise. I'm so happy to be here.
Yeah. Well, okay, let's dive in because I know our listeners are really curious about what is this dementia connection model? You talk about cognitive behavioral theory in relation to this model, and I'm really curious. As a therapist, I'm really curious about how are we using cognitive behavioral theory with memory impairment? So maybe you can guide us a little on that.
Sure. Yeah. The Dementia Connection Model is one of the first to use cognitive behavioral theory and apply that into memory care. And cognitive behavioral theory, very simply, is that our thoughts and our emotions and, our bodily sensations, our environment, they're all connected, right? And they're connected in how they influence what we think and feel, how we feel. And ultimately affects how we behave. And so research trials demonstrate that this particular model is effective treatment for a wide range of conditions, ranging from anxiety and depression to pain and insomnia. And as you know, these are all, conditions or circumstances that are very commonly coming hand in hand with Alzheimer's and other forms of dementia. So for example, if a person is living with dementia and a situation occurs and they experience, negative thoughts or emotions around that situation, then that's going to result in behaviors. And when I say behaviors, I just mean forms of communicating that look like anger or worry or fear or aggression. And wandering, and we're wondering why this has happened and what we can do to help them in experience, a more positive state of being and more positive outcomes. So with cognitive behavioral theory, you're able to take this situation and you're going to introduce a positive stimuli or a positive scenario, which influences the person living with dementia to have positive thoughts and feelings and emotions. And that results in positive outcomes, positive behavioral expressions of communication, increased connection with the person that they're receiving care from. And so it's just really exciting because I think that in my experience and in the experience of people that I've spoken with and helped is that there's this feeling of disconnect from your loved one when they're living with dementia. And using that cognitive behavioral theory is kind of a roadmap to reconnect with them in a new way and help them have the quality of life that you want for your loved one or for somebody that you're caring for.
I love it. This is so exciting. I love the way that you describe this. And what I'm envisioning is in my training as a therapist, we're teaching people to use those tools internally for themselves. And I haven't taken your training. I actually, for the record, I'm signed up for it. I'm excited. um, but what it sounds to me like is that you are teaching or educating the family member, the caregiver, on how to kind of an external way of implementing the benefits or the tools. So instead of, like I said, in therapy, we're teaching an individual how to access that state themselves.
Mhm.
Sounds like you're teaching the caregiver how to model that or initiate that with someone else. Is that correct?
That's exactly right. And the reason for that, one of the reasons, is because of the progression of dementia. There's the theory of regression, which as the disease progresses, they regress to an earlier stage, such as young as 7 years old or even younger. And I say that delicately because I don't ever want anybody to infantilize somebody living with dementia or do so in their approach or how they engage them. It's just from a scientific point of view, from a developmental point of view, they've regressed. And what sort of switched the light, like an aha moment for me when I was learning about the theory of regression through Dr. Stelter's model, is it's the coping skills. So like you said, in therapy, you're teaching people how to build up coping skills for them to handle different scenarios, emotions and feelings and thoughts. If somebody has regressed, so take a 7-year-old, for example, would you expect a 7-year-old to understand that they are behaving aggressively because they skipped their nap or because they were up too early and they're actually overtired? They don't have the coping skills to connect those dots. And that's the same thing once the disease has progressed to a certain point. And so with cognitive behavioral theory, you are stepping in as the caregiver and you are helping them connect the dots for those coping skills. So using the holidays as an example, stimuli that you're introducing intentionally to their day and structuring their day intentionally. You're having small gatherings rather than a big party. You're having a simple, beautiful holiday themed craft and you're playing familiar Christmas classics in the background. And this is going to stimulate them to have positive memories of that time of year and help them vocalize those memories through their thoughts and emotions and make them ultimately, thinking about actions and behaviors more sociable, more interactive, more at ease and less anxious because they know what they're supposed to be doing and where they're supposed to be and who they are. And so it's really powerful.
That's amazing. One of the things that I love about you, what you're talking about, is pulling in all of the senses and how powerful that is. I don't know that we often stop to think about that, but the what a valuable tool that is to pull in the senses, and also that I feel like it's a direct connection when we are not relying on the verbal or the ways of communicating that we're more used to. So can you describe, I would love to just give people a little taste of maybe some of the tools that you might use or with this model.
Absolutely. And the tools are sensory based because of that regression. A person living with dementia learns differently. And sorry, I'm geeking out about it because I think of that quote that we hear so much that's, they won't remember what you said or what you did, but they'll remember how you made them feel. And I am butchering and paraphrasing that, but we've all heard it in this space.
Yes. Yes.
This is why that quote is true.
Yeah.
Due to regression, a person living with dementia learns through sensory-based information, just like people of a chronological age, a 7-year-old that matches a person living with dementia whose developmental age has regressed. So you're able to introduce sensory-based learning to physiologically train them or teach them how to go about their day while living with this disease. And with the Dementia Connection Model, Dr. Stelter has put together something that's called the perfect day. And it's essentially a template, right, of how to structure the positive stimulation, the sensory-based stimuli that you're introducing for the person in your care throughout the day. Build that structure and that routine and do it over and over again. So that, again, that quote is true. They remember the way that you made them feel. So for example, in the morning, you would introduce different sensory-based information than what you would introduce in the afternoon or in the evening. And when I say sensory-based, I'm talking about olfactory, so your sense of smell, or tactile, or auditory. So a lot of us are really familiar with the example I'm going to use is Alive Inside. When the
What a
gentleman
beautiful.
hears the music,
Yeah.
that is auditory stimulation. And that's the one that
Hang
we
on,
most
I want to make sure our listeners know what this is. If you haven't listened to it or seen it, you have to watch it. And I'm sure it's all over YouTube. But if you were to Google Alive Inside, and I want to give full credit, and I don't have that information pulled up, but I'll put it in the show notes. It's a beautiful example of a gentleman whose later stages, I would guess, later stages of dementia, and they put headphones on him and they play music that clearly he's familiar with, and you see him come to life and light up. And so it's just a beautiful illustration of how the sense of sound and bring someone joy and life energy, I would say.
he was nonverbal, and after listening to the music, he was able to express himself immediately afterwards. And so with the perfect day, it gives you guidance for auditory on what type of music to play at what type of day, what time of day. So in the morning, you would play upbeat music with words, ideally music from their teenage years. And the reason for that is that there was a study done showing that it's that music from that time period in a person's life that they are able to retain memories with the longest. And by playing that music from their teenage years, upbeat with words first thing in the morning, it actually helps them vocalize and become more articulate and verbal first thing in the morning, and sets them up for success for their day. And when you move to midday, you would keep playing the upbeat music, but without words. And by evening time, you would be playing non-biharmonic. So what that would mean is music with just a single instrument. So maybe you're playing some piano or harp music in the background. And for olfactory, it follows a similar arc where you have high intensity in the morning, and then it sort of eases up in the evening. So in the morning, you could use peppermint and wild orange essential oil, for example, peppermint being invigorating to the senses, and it helps with alertness specifically and attention. And then wild orange uplifts the spirit. If you think about citrus scents and how they just seem to improve your mood. So combine those again to set them up for success for the day. Another example moving into midday would be bergamot, which stimulates the appetite. And we know that appetite is something that can be lost as the disease progresses. And this is a way you can support that without a supplement or a pill. And then in the evening, we all know about lavender. That's the first thing you think of when you think of essential oils. And so that can really help with, if you know, for example, that the person in your care experiences sundowning around 3:30, 4 o'clock every evening. Half an hour before that, around 3 o'clock, you could start diffusing lavender and playing non-biharmonic music that they enjoy to sort of proactively head that off. And that's what I mean when I talk about like prescriptive engagement. If somebody goes in and has surgery and you know that the medications they were given in the hospital are going to wear off at 4 o'clock, you're going to give them ibuprofen or whatever pain medication around 3:30 to proactively head off that pain. And that's what you want to think about when you're thinking of prescriptive engagement, is proactively heading off some of the challenges that you know this person experiences throughout their day. And then tactile, that sense of touch, same thing. So in the morning, you think of really high energy activities or activities that require a lot of cognitive focus. And you move to, as the day goes on, to more mellow activities. So for example, pet therapy or, doll therapy or something calming to that effect. And so those are some examples of where you're using all of the different senses in a really intentional, structured way. And that's why they called it the perfect day, is because that's what we're all looking for. when you're living with dementia and you're caring for somebody with dementia, you really only have the moment that you're in and the day that you're in. And how can you influence that to give that person the best possible day, senses of peace and contentment and happiness and clarity, as opposed to fear and anxiety and confusion, and improve the quality of life of you as the caregiver as well.
I love this so much. I'm envisioning.
I'll just like keep going.
Yeah, no. This is great. I'm envisioning almost, I have this image of a caregiver using this model, holding someone's hand through the senses, through the day, just leading someone through the day by using these senses. I mean, what a beautiful experience. I'm also such a fan, as anybody would be, of taking a big step backwards and looking at what are the strengths of an individual who might need assistance. And clearly this model is tapping into the strengths of those senses. And so if we know that works, then let's utilize that. And it sounds like that's really what this model is doing.
Absolutely. That's why I call the perfect day kind of like a template, because what you'll do is you'll take the recommendations of intensity or essential oils or music, and you'll plug in the preferences of the individual so that you really customize, it's preference based. Lavender is very soothing, but somebody may not like lavender. So you would look at other aromatherapy that's soothing, for example, but you would know you plug it in at this time of day. You would take their favorite music and plug it in at this time of day. You know what activities they do enjoy and what they don't enjoy. So then this just gives you a framework of where to sort of plug those in. And like you said, take them by the hand and lead them through the day. But the template is taking the caregiver by the hand and helping them get through the day, knowing that they're doing it intentionally. It feels so often like you're just flying by the seat of your pants or making it up as you go, or you feel so reactive, like you're just putting out fires.
You're just chasing problems. And oh my gosh, yeah, what a relief to feel like you as a caregiver that there would be a model or a template to follow.
Mm-hmm.
And the other thing I'm such a fan of, I know our listeners know this, if you listen to this podcast, is I'm such a fan of tapping into the sense of curiosity and creativity with our care and with our own self-care. And when we're constantly living in a high stress state, we're not able to tap into that as caregivers. And so having a model, having tools to use is going to allow ourselves to relax a little and settle into, even if things don't go perfectly, even if it is still a stressful day, knowing that there's this piece to fall back on.
Absolutely. Yeah, it just gives you that tool that you carry with throughout your day, and it's going to be there when you wake up the next morning and you can try again. And as you said, it's strength based because you are focusing on the preferences of the individual and making sure that this is what their perfect day would be if they could choose that for themselves. And so it maintains their independence and really plays into that and lowers the stress of the caregiver. It doesn't have to, every day is going to be different. When we say the perfect day, we just mean what's the potential for today? And can we meet the potential there for both the caregiver and for the person receiving the care?
I love that. Oh. Can you talk a little bit about, I'm curious about two things, they may overlap, so I'll ask them both at the same time, but I'm curious about the evidence-based piece of the research. And I'm also curious about how this model works, whether it's different or it's not different, whether you're working in a facility setting versus a home setting. And then another layer to add on to that is professional caregivers versus family caregivers, the dynamics that might come up there. So sorry, that's a lot. Like they overlap it. You just take it and run with it, Marissa.
All right. We'll start with the evidence-based. So it's evidence-based because, we've mentioned Dr. Stalter. She is a clinical psychologist. She is a credentialed dementia specialist, and she developed this model of care over a 12-year period in clinical settings, directly working with caregivers and people living with dementia. For example, the perfect day, she did a small group study in assisted living and found that if you stuck with the perfect day routine for 4 weeks, specifically around aromatherapy, the people living with dementia would know instinctively, based on what scent they were smelling, what they needed to be doing. So for example, if you always diffuse wild orange and bergamot at lunchtime, what she found was that people living with dementia would start gravitating towards the dining room when that scent was being diffused, which is incredible on so many different levels. It completely debunks the myth that people living with dementia can't learn. It goes back to showing that they can learn. It's just sensory based. And with routine and repetition and positive reward, they can learn over at least a 4-week period. It can take the stress levels off of those caregivers who are not having to find the people who normally may be wandering or may not have an appetite and not know where the dining room is, what have you, whatever the challenge may be. And all of a sudden that person is already in the dining room and they already have an appetite and they're ready to eat and be social. And so that's, she has studied this in such a practical way from a caregiver's perspective. And that's what I mean when we were talking before this. And it's nice to have facts and figures. We need the facts and figures for context, but we need something like this that's high touch, that's high skill, that's practical for the caregiver and still evidence-based and sitting in those facts and figures. And so that's what I like that's so different about this. But saying that, it's applicable whether you're in a community-based living situation and you're a professional caregiver, or if you are a family caregiver living at home, or you've had mom or dad move in with you and your family and you don't have a background in it. You don't have to be a professional. It's applicable to communities and professionals who have adopted a specific approach to care. So for example, David Troxell's best friend approach, or Teepa Snow's positive approach to care, or David Camp's Montessori method. This doesn't conflict any of those. It just enhances and supports and supplements them. So no matter where you're at as a caregiver or how you're approaching this is just going to help you go to bed at night knowing that you are giving the best quality care that you can to the people that are in your care or to your loved one at home.
Because so often that's what we hear, from caregivers, whether it's usually family members, but also professionals, is the concern that I'm not doing enough, the concern that people want to do it right, they want to do everything they can. And when caregivers are already overburdened and overwhelmed and overstressed, to have to go out and do the research themselves or come up with their own program, or again, tap into a sense of curiosity and creativity when they don't have the bandwidth to do that. This is such a gift to have an opportunity to have a model to follow. Again, it's evidence-based. So, and when we say evidence-based, I certainly don't want to imply that because it's evidence-based, it's guaranteed to work. What really I think we mean by that is just that it shows that these tools are helpful and can be helpful and have proven to be helpful. And so it doesn't mean that it's like going to work every time, but it's a model that you can follow and you can feel good about following. One thing may work one day and not the next. And according to the research, it sounds like is the longer you do it, the more you stick with it, the more likely it is for folks to learn. And by the way, what an amazing statement you make. I mean, just hearing you say that people can learn, that people have the capacity to still learn, even with dementia, by tapping into the strengths of their senses. And It's just, there's a lot of hope there, again, for quality of life.
It's something I feel, that particular point is something I feel very passionate about. There's a lot of myths and misconceptions about dementia and all of the many forms. It could be Alzheimer's, it could be frontotemporal or vascular, Lewy body, or younger onset. And they all present differently and have different challenges. But I just feel like so often it is a lot of doom and gloom, and understandably so. It is a devastating disease. There is no cure for it. It is progressive, and I'm not diminishing that by any means. But there is so much joy still to be had if you have the right tools. And, like I said, when you are caring for somebody and you're responsible for their quality of life and how they walk through this disease, it keeps you up at night. And I know that there are caregivers sitting up and asking themselves what they could have done differently to prevent whatever happened, or what could have been done better. And there's so many books and resources and research out there, and you feel overwhelmed. And it's just any opportunity I have to say, there's a lot of joy and celebration to be had through those years, that you can learn together, that this person living with dementia still has the capacity to learn just in a new way, that yes, they've regressed, but now you're able to connect with your mom or dad at a different point in their life. You're getting to know mom when she was a teenager, if you know how to tap into that and connect with her in that way. And so it's just finding, that balanced perspective as opposed to that fear-based approach.
I love that you're speaking to that. That's so important to me. And really one of the reasons that I started this podcast was to not only I guess to give people a sense of hope in quality of life. And I think about how you said it just so beautifully, Marissa. I don't need to repeat it, but just the honoring the devastation that can be experienced when receiving the disease, the diagnosis. And most people, by the time the diagnosis occurs, it's been years of living with it and fear. And to change that mindset, to change the experience and plant the seed of possibility that there is still life and opportunity and growth and connection that we have the privilege of tapping into through this is so profound. And so clearly this model is more than just a model of making life a little easier or helping people eat better or sleep better. From what I'm hearing you say, this model is really presenting an opportunity for deep connection and quality of life between both the caregiver and the care receiver.
It is. It's even growing up like you and I did and speaking the language that we do. I wish that I had had this model for my grandpa.
What would that have meant to you? How would life have been different?
And then we circle right back to the beginning, where I wouldn't have felt so disconnected. I would have been able to stay as close and connected to him as I had always felt, right up until the end. We hear it described as the longest goodbye sometimes. I have mixed feelings about that. And the reason for that is because goodbyes can be really beautiful things. And so that's just something that, in hindsight, this model, the perfect day, would have helped.
Marissa, this has been such a beautiful conversation on so many levels. And I know for myself personally, I just appreciate the work that Dr. Stelter has done with this, because I think that intuitively we've known this, and I think most family members feel it too, but haven't had again, the language or the model or the tools to be able to access that place. And so, it's just a beautiful opportunity. Is there, Marissa, in our conversation today, is there any big points that we failed to talk about that you think would be important for people to know? And also, I really want to let our listeners know how to reach you, how to learn more about you, how to learn more about the Dementia Connection Model. And I guess we can clarify too, I didn't ask the question, but is this training a training that anybody can take? Do you have to be a healthcare professional to take this training? Give us a little idea about that as well.
Okay. So in terms of, did we miss anything? If you are a caregiver listening to this episode and you want to know what's next, how do I get started right now? All of this is in Dr. Stelter's The Busy Caregiver's Guide to Advanced Alzheimer's. It's Johns Hopkins published book, and in it, after each chapter, she has logs and tips and tricks of how to implement this in a practical way in the day-to-day life. So that would be my recommendation, is to get a hold of a copy of that, whether through the library or Audible or what have you, and have a listen or read, and you'll be able to start doing some of what we've talked about today. If you want to take the training, anybody can take the training. This is for both the family caregiver, it's for the professional caregiver, it's for somebody who's not a caregiver, but somebody in the family has received the diagnosis, or somebody who just wants to know more about the, dementia, the different forms of dementia, and how to use this model to support the person living with dementia. You can go to the Dementia Connection Institute.com and you can register for an upcoming seminar. They're 6 hours. There's in-person and virtual options. There's weekday and weekend options. So we try to cater to everybody's needs with those. And if you want to contact me directly, you can also find me at inpursuitofwellness.com. And I'll have more information on the Dementia Connection Model, any upcoming seminars that I'm offering, and other supportive services. So
wonderful. Oh, Marissa, it is such a privilege to know you. And it always gives me hope, meeting other like-minded folks who just have such a passion for supporting the quality of life of people living with dementia, and the quality of life as people, journey through their caregiving experience too. So thank you so much for coming on, really.
Thank you for having me. Thank you for doing this podcast and the meaningful, loving work that you do that gives voices to people like me, to connect all of us as caregivers in different backgrounds and journeys, and so that we can make a difference in the lives of the people that we care about.
Great. Thanks so much.